To start us off, I want to talk about, as the title says, democratizing the workplace. And I want to start off by this kind of framing question. So, I think it's fair to say that the Western world, which is a very nebulous term, we pride ourselves on being a democratic society, you know? We have democratic institutions, systems, so that people have a say in how our society is run, governed, and affect the decision-making process. And I think it's fair to say that it's one of our highest held values as a society. But this same thing does not extend to our workplaces. Like, why are our workplaces not democratic? They are authoritarian by nature. In that, I mean, they're top down. So, you know, everything comes from the top, flows down, instead of bottoms up as a democracy where the people decide things. This is the framing for our discussion. And I want to define some terms that I'll probably be throwing around in this conversation. So this will be a short intro on some Marxist terminology. Marxism is the philosophy that communism is based on. Yes, it is. But Marxism in and of itself is not a bad thing. Marxism is a philosophy which is used to see history of mankind through a specific lens, which I will discuss now. All right, so let's define some terms that many of you probably know, some of you might not know. So, firstly, proletariat. So, proletariat means the class of wage earners in an economic society whose only possession. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, 6 inches, and welcome to the Cuties. Very nice to meet you, and I hope you have a great stream. Thank you. I hope you have a great day as well. Goodbye, 6 inches. So, sorry, let me get back to that. So, the proletariat is the class of wage earners in an economic society whose only possession of significant material value is their labor power, so how much they can work. Marxist theory considers the proletariat to be oppressed by capitalism and the wage system, aka the bourgeoisie, which I will define next. This oppression gives the proletariat common economic and political interests that transcend national boundaries. Then we come to the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie is a sociologically defined social class, especially in contemporary times, referring to people with a certain cultural and financial capital belonging to the middle or upper middle class. The upper, haute, middle, moyenne, and petite bourgeoisie, which are collectively designated as the bourgeoisie. Affluent, often opulent stratum of the middle class who stand opposite the proletariat class. So in Marxist philosophy, the bourgeoisie is the social class that came to own the means of production during modern industrialization and whose societal concerns are the value of property and the preservation of capital to ensure the perpetuation of their economic supremacy in society. So these are the two main classes in Marxist philosophy that Marx saw as opposing forces. Then we have petite bourgeoisie. So the term petite bourgeoisie or petty bourgeoisie, which I will probably be using more, was used by Marx to identify the socioeconomic stratum of the bourgeoisie that comprised of small-scale capitalists such as shopkeepers and workers who manage the production, distribution, and or exchange of commodities and or services owned by their bourgeoisie employers. So if you have ever heard the term bougie, it comes from the word bourgeoisie, if I'm not mistaken. Then lastly, we have capital. Capital is in the first place an accumulation of money and cannot make its appearance in history until the circulation of commodities has given rise to the money relation. Secondly, the distinction between money, which is capital, and money, which is acquired in order to buy something, is just money, facilitating the exchange of commodities. Marx represented this as commodity, money, commodity. So that means that you have commodity, which makes you money, so you can buy more commodity. On the other hand, the capital On the other hand, capital is money which is used to buy something only in order to sell it again. Marx represented this as a money capital money. This means that capital exists only within the process of buying and selling, as money advanced only in order to get it back again. So this would be, for example, you buying an apartment to flip it and sell it again, or just buy an apartment or a bunch of apartments so that they can accrue you more money. So this would be capital, whereas the money you get from your job to pay your rent and buy food is just money. Airbnb, kinda, yeah, Airbnb can be considered capital, yes. I would say it's capital in the case where you are specifically buying apartments to have them be Airbnb, for example. But it doesn't have to be just Airbnb. It can be even just traditional renting, which many companies do. They buy out large swaths of property just to rent them to make money, and that is capital. Whereas, your money that you make from your job to pay your rent, to buy food, to buy games, that's just money, because that what you buy will not give you more money later on, if that makes sense. Okay. So those are the main terms I want to define for this conversation, because I'm probably going to be using those a lot. Of course, there's way more to Marxist theory than this. I'm not by no means an expert in Marxist theory. What I know, I've learned from originally in high school. I studied sociology, and we went through Marxism in sociology, but beyond that, because that was a while ago, what I know is from my consuming of leftist content on YouTube and on Twitch. To cap off the Marxist theory part of this conversation, Marx saw the world and human history as a struggle between these two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and predicted that we would eventually end up in a classless society where we are all equal. Have you read either the Manifesto or the Capital? I have not read either of them. No, I cannot say I have. I haven't read a lot of theory, to be honest. I haven't. I will be completely honest. I have not read a lot of theory. So, the way that Marx looked at history was that once money came into the picture, it gave rise to the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and then it's been a struggle between these two groups, with the bourgeoisie becoming more and more powerful, and eventually it would lead to the proletariat rising up and seizing power from the bourgeoisie, and eventually lead to a classless society where people are equal. This prediction, of course, has not yet happened. I think he had a very specific timeline to when it would happen as well, so that part hasn't panned out. But Marxist philosophy is an interesting way to look at history. It's definitely useful. History in general is just depends what lens you use to look at history. It's not objective, because you can look at it from a sociological standpoint, a market standpoint, a philosophical standpoint. There's so many different ways to look at history. So now then, talking about the current system that we preside in. So we currently live in a capitalist system. Of course, it depends which part of the world you live in, but talking about the Nordics, where I live, it is a capitalist society, although it is more social democratic than ultra-capitalistic than, for example, the US. The US being a very, very heightened version of our capitalism that we have in Europe. It is a kind of extreme version of what we have, because here in the Nordics we have, social security programs. There are more restrictions on what companies can do in general. There's better protection of worker rights, etc., which the US doesn't have to the same extent. So in the current capitalist system, when you work at a company, be it any company, we're talking about traditional corporations here. Traditional corporations, you are not going to have much say in how things are done, what things are being done at a company. So this will extend to like all industries. Of course, in some companies you will have more, input, but at the end of the day, you are not the one who makes the decision. By you, I mean the proletariat, the worker. It is someone usually above you if you are not a manager or a C level executive. If you are not part of the bourgeoisie class, then you are not the one who makes the final call. So let's say, like my example, I work in a game company. I am essentially part of the bourgeoisie, which is one of the reasons I have been thinking about this a lot. I'm petty bourgeoisie because I'm a producer. And I don't like my role in that hierarchy, because in that role I am serving the bourgeois class and oppressing the proletariat, which I don't like. That really doesn't sit well with me. And it's taken me a while to realize what has been bothering me about my role, and this is the realization that I've come to in recent months. So, getting back to this current system, so you have little to say. So let's take games for example. You're working on a game at a studio where you are an employee. Let's make it a mid-sized studio, a few hundred people. We're working on a project. Who makes the decisions on like what the game will be, when it will come out, how much will it cost, what's the schedule, etc., etc. It is not the worker who gets to decide those things, or even get to decide who decides those things. Those decisions come from the leads, the C-suits, well, not even the leads actually, I'm going to say like the C-level people, like the CEO, CFO, etc., and then the board, which is usually comprised of people in the company and external people as well, who might be investors, for example. And their primary function is to serve the shareholders, and their primary function also is to bring profit to shareholders. And in a hyper-capitalist company, they will prioritize profit over people, because in a capitalist system, you are driven to maximize profit at the expense and by oppressing the proletariat. So, in this system, you don't get to decide your salary. You can discuss a little bit about it, but in general, you don't get to decide it. Your work hours, you don't get to decide those either. You might be given some leeway there. You don't get to decide your tasks. All of this comes from the top. You have, like I said, little to no influence on who is running the company. So you don't get to decide who's on the board. You don't get to decide who's the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, etc. You have no decision over that. That is done above you by other people. And you have no say in that. None. You don't get to decide how the company is run. You don't get to decide what the company's goals are in the short term or in the long term. None. They might ask you like, hey, what do you think are important things? But you don't get to make that decision. So that is not actual decision-making power that you are given. And this is more of a general point about companies, but companies are not loyal to communities. So if you have a company in a community that gives many jobs and is quintessential to the community, that company is in no way loyal. So the company can decide that, okay, in 3 months we're going to close down this location and everyone is going to lose their jobs, or they'll be given opportunities to go to other locations, which a lot of people can't just lift up their life and move to another place. It's not practical. So, for example, Nokia, the Finnish phone company, closed a factory in Salo, when was it, 2016, I think? It wasn't too long ago. And 780 jobs were gone. So 780 jobs gone, just like that. The workers didn't get a say in that. The proletariat has no say in the factory closing down. It is a decision from the bourgeoisie, from the top, that comes in there. And in this system, the bourgeois is not looking... Yeah, the whole city died, exactly. And no consideration is given to that, or if it is, it's not cared about. The well-being of the worker is not cared about, and the workers didn't have a say in that. So in this whole system, the bourgeois is concerned with capital, increasing capital, protecting capital, but not the proletariat, and maximizing capital by oppressing the bourgeois, so driving down wages, maximizing work hours, making sure that everything is optimized to maximize profit. And this system, in my opinion, is unjust. It's not fair. It treats people poorly, and it is authoritarian, which I don't like. Like, imagine you lived in a monarchy. Hello, the United Kingdom. Imagine you lived in the monarchy, and your king decides that, hey, starting from tomorrow, everyone who lives on the west side of the country has to move to the east side of the country because I said so. We would balk at that. We would say, no, you can't do that. But then why can companies do this? Why can a company say, hey, we're going to close down this factory and 780 people are going to lose their job? Deal with it. No opinion from the workers. The bourgeois just decide that, and we have to live with it. We have to. The burden is on the worker to be prepared for a rainy day, but it's never the bourgeois who has to be prepared for a rainy day. Hello, Sweden. Yeah, exactly. It's never the bourgeois that has to be prepared for a rainy day. Like that's also part of the capitalist system. People have to always be prepared for rainy days. I mean, workers, the proletariat, always have to be prepared for a rainy day. But then if, say there is a global pandemic which causes the travel industry to buckle because no one is traveling, they are never told to just, deal with it. Thank you. Deal with it. They are told to... they're not told. They ask immediately the government to bail them out. They're never told to say, hey, where's your rainy day fund? Never. They're always bailed out by governments. But people are never bailed out. There are 40 million people now without a job in the US because of the COVID situation. They got one stimulus check, $1,200, which not everyone has gotten yet because the system is so ill-equipped to handle that type of pressure. And that's it. There's discussions now of a second stimulus check, but still, it's nuts. It's wrong. And no federal rent freeze, exactly. Which, the federal rent freeze is also, it's a difficult proposition because there are legitimately people who rely on getting money from, their monthly income from, rent and stuff. So I understand it's not as simple, but yeah, still, at the end of the day, in a capitalist system, preparing for the rainy day is always a burden on the proletariat, never on the bourgeois, which is wrong. Proletariat is expected to survive with no income, but renting homeowners are expected to keep getting money. Exactly. Yes. Exactly. It's a fucked up system. Luckily, here in the Nordics, we are more on social democratic side of things. Although in recent years, it has been getting shittier with austerity. Even here, it's been getting worse and going more towards the right side of things, which I'm not a huge fan of. But then, so how can we make things better in the workplace? Well, we can start democratizing it. One of those ways is worker co-ops. So these are enterprises owned by the members, aka the workers. So each worker, if they are a member, I will speak to this separately as well. So each person owns, or each member owns the company, and each person has one vote, the members that is, and decisions are made democratically. So the workers get to decide what is done with the profit of the company, for example. What are the working hours? How much do we work? What is the focus of the company? Etc. The workers get to decide all of this. So for example, profit is just one focus in a worker co-op. So you need profit in order for the company to survive and push forward. There's no doubt. Without profit, the company will go under. That's just how it do be in our current system. But it is not the only focus of the company. Profit is a focus, but jobs become a bigger focus. Because when people lose jobs, it's a very bad thing for everyone, because when they lose jobs, they don't have a steady income. And when they don't have a steady income, they can't use money to buy things. And when they don't buy things, there's less money circulating, etc., etc., etc. So yes, by this way, the worker has more say in what the company does and how things are run in a democratic way. So this is all very high level, very theoretical. I'm going to give you an example from a European company, nonetheless. You might have heard of it. It's called Spain. In Spain, there are the Mondragon cooperatives. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Mondragon, I don't know. Mondragon, I'm going to say it like that. So Mondragon is an area in Basque country in Spain, northern part of Spain. So there's a minority of people, the Basque, who live there. They have their own language, their own culture, and there's been like tensions between the Spanish government and the Basque country for a long time, because there's been many discussions and stuff about the Basque country becoming its own region. Tensions, yeah, and it's a bit more than just tensions, but to put it lightly, tensions. Currently, it is still, at time of recording, part of Spain. But we're not here to discuss the geopolitical situation of the Basque country. We're here to discuss the Mondragon cooperatives. So this was founded in 1956 and still operating to this day, so over 50 years. And it is a federation of 120 companies run and owned by their workers. This info might be a bit old because I was getting it from a video from 2014, so my numbers might be a bit off here, but you'll get the gist of it. They have about 85,000 plus members, and also a bunch of employees, which I will talk about in a bit. So these members all have a say in how the company is run. They have a vote. And the company is making about $25 billion in yearly sales. This was at least back in 2014. So they are making a lot of money. So this is a clearly very lucrative business. They have the lowest unemployment in Spain, at least back then. Of course, things are very different now with COVID. Mondragon also have opened a bunch of schools, and they also run a university. And they do a wide variety of enterprise, so factories, banks, supermarkets, technology, all kinds of things. So all of these different parts are different cooperative enterprises that are owned by the workers, and then together they form the Mondragon cooperatives. So there are 77 enterprises also outside of Spain. So this has also been expanded globally, and that's part of the part that doesn't work about the Mondragon cooperatives, which I'll talk about later. So each of these cooperatives has their own main decision-making body, which is the General Assembly, which is once a year. All of the members get together, and there's mandatory participation. So everyone has to come to these yearly meetings where decisions are made, and there are also mandatory preparatory meetings before this so that everyone is well prepared on, for example, if they vote to keep the current general manager, this would be the equivalent of a CEO in a company, but this is decided by the workers, the proletariat, who will be the general manager. Will they keep the current one, or will they hire a new one? So stuff like this, they have several meetings beforehand to get informed on what the situation is. So during this meeting, decisions that get made, for example, is how to keep the general manager, hire a new one, how to run the company, so where the company should physically be located. So if, for example, they want to move the company, close down a factory, etc., this decision has to be made by the General Assembly. So the workers have to vote to move the business. So for example, in the US, we've seen during the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, a lot of jobs, factory jobs, were moved overseas because of cheaper labor. This, in a cooperative system, couldn't happen without the people voting on it. Then also, how business should be done, all these types of things. How to run the company is part of the General Assembly's decision. And then how profit should be used. So what does the company do with the profit? Because in a capitalist corporation, profit is generally given to shareholders, put back into the company, to the C execs. They might get some fat bonuses, and then maybe some scraps are given to the workers with some, yearly, quarterly bonuses. But we're talking about scraps in those cases. Here's what Mondragon does, and I think this is super interesting. So 10% of every enterprise's gross profit, so this is the profit that they are making, is put into a common fund for sustaining that system that coordinates them, because they put a lot of energy into coordinating this system, because it is a large network of enterprises working together in the Mondragon community in Spain. So 10% of every enterprise's gross profit goes into this common fund. Then 45% of every enterprise's gross profit is left for the enterprise to build their co-op, so they can invest it back in the company, buy equipment, etc., etc. And this is where we get super interesting. So we have 55% of the profit. So 10% goes to this common fund for sustaining the system. 45% they can decide themselves how they use to improve their own enterprise. And then the last 45% of every enterprise's gross profit is distributed to all members of the enterprise. But not as straight cash. It's put into a fund, and every person is credited there for their own amount, and that becomes the basis for their pension. And it's yearly. So every year, 45% gets put into your personal pension and builds. So it builds and builds and builds and builds and grows the longer you are there. And this pension is on top of the general pension that people get from the social security system. So you have your social security system pension and the Mondragon pension. And on top of this, so for this 45% that gets put in there, At the end of each year, you get 7% as a bonus of the amount that you've accumulated to your pension at that point. I think this is a fascinating system where truly the work that you put in, you get to truly see the fruits of that labor. But I really like this system. It sounds super cool. I'm sure this is not a perfect system, but it's very interesting to see that. But it's super fascinating to me. This is a very fascinating model, and truly it brings the ownership of the company to the worker. I really like this, because if the workers put in the work, they get to reap the benefit. The success is wholly theirs, and it goes back to the community. I think this is a really, really interesting system. And the fact that Mondragon has survived for over 50 years and is so huge is a testament that it has worked. Of course, this is just a single example. I wouldn't go to say that this is proof that the worker co-op system works. This is just one example. But there is also research, I will have to look this up, I don't have it on hand, but there is research to suggest that worker co-ops are better equipped to deal with market changes. They also are better at surviving the first 3 years, which is usually the most precarious time for a new company, etc., etc. But of course, there are not that many worker co-ops in the world yet. And then finding research is difficult because they're spread out the world, so they're all in different languages. But there is some research to show. So this is a very, very interesting system. So 45% goes to your pension, and then 7% of the accrued pension that you have gets given to you yearly. So it's a pretty interesting system. Then talking about salary, because one of the big problems I feel in the capitalist system that we have now in capitalist enterprises is that people at the top, the board, the C-suits, etc., have enormous salaries. Insanely enormous salaries. I don't think they're justified. Because often the reasoning why C-level people have such big salaries is because, well, the work that they do is... they are responsible for the entire company, so they have to steer it in the right direction. If they make mistakes, then, it's all on them. But I don't really buy it, because if the company is doing poorly, and if the company has a bad year, for example, and has a loss, it's not the C-levels that take a cut in their pay to save money so that no one loses a job. It's usually the workers that have to take the brunt of that failure. So I don't buy that. There are some exceptions. For example, in Japan, Nintendo did famously, the C-levels did take a pay cut during the Wii U era, when Nintendo was doing very poorly, so that people wouldn't lose their jobs, which I think is the right move. And then the other kind of reasoning for that is, well, the C-levels, their work is more valuable. In which case, I would have to ask you for the metric. How do you measure the value of someone's work? Time is not a good way to measure that, because I could just put in more work hours and then I should get paid the same amount. It doesn't make sense. By their salary. Oh, yeah, exactly. Kind of a circular argument there. Leftist served. Yeah, what about Venezuela? Venezuela! What is the metric that we use to measure if it's the value of how do we measure the value of work? I don't think there's an objective way of measuring that. So I don't think those C-level salaries are justified in big companies where they are tens of millions per year, where people in the worker, the proletariat, is making maybe like tens of thousands per year. I don't think that's just. So in Mondragon, in most of the co-ops, there's a rule. So the co-ops get to decide this themselves. But there is a rule that the highest paid person is not allowed to get more than 4.5 times what the lowest paid person gets. There are some exceptions to this within the Mondragon cooperatives, and in those cases it goes up to 6 times. And that is the pay difference in general, which I think is a lot more fair. Sees the means of production. Exactly. It's a lot more fair. Whereas in a capitalist corporation, you might have hundreds of times difference between the highest earners and lowest earner. Then interestingly also in the Mondragon cooperatives, competition amongst the cooperatives is not allowed. So if there's a cooperative in a specific industry, no other cooperatives can go in there. And this is to make sure that the whole system is cooperating with itself and not against itself. Then, of course, we have to discuss that what if, you have to get rid of some jobs because, an industry is no longer needing all of those jobs. So let's say the example that in the video that I watched was they have a washing machine factory in Mondragon, but those washing machines weren't selling as well, so they had to downsize because their business wasn't viable enough at that scale. So they have a point system in Mondragon, and I know that this immediately brings to mind, I think Google is the one, or it was Microsoft who had this infamous point system that you were graded on, and that would tell how good of an employee you are. This is separate to that. It is not about that. So this point system, it measures, how long you've worked, how old you are, what is your income bracket, what type of skills do you have, a lot of different areas, and it gives you a point. And this system is there to make sure that if a job gets, if a job becomes redundant, people are given a menu of options for other jobs. They're not fired straight out. So this is for members, mind you. I will talk about employees in a bit. For members, so you get to choose depending on what your point score is. Hey, this job is no longer available, but these jobs you can choose from to shift to. And then, because of that, you might have to commute further because the job is a bit further, and that commute will be covered by the cooperative. And if you take a job that is extra far, you will get that added into the point system as a bonus because you made the extra effort to take a job that is further away. And with this system, Mondragon has been able to have no layoffs in years. And again, I will emphasize this info is from 2014. I'm not sure what the situation is right now, especially with the COVID situation. So that is, in a nutshell, the Mondragon cooperatives. Now, the biggest problem that they have is that there are members and then there are employees. So this kind of creates two groups, which I'm kind of not comfortable with. I understand where the employee system comes from. It is kind of a stepping stone into the cooperative. So first you're an employee, and then after a while, I don't know what the time is, you can become a member. So to me that kind of makes sense because you have to have some investment in, not like monetary investment, but buy-in into the cooperative and its general vision, general atmosphere to become a member and make decisions. Kind of makes sense. I can get that. But this system creates a lot of problems with working abroad because they've for example in China, due to cultural differences, it's been very difficult to get people into that you own this work mindset, and managing all of that with I can see that becoming a problem with the members are over here in Spain and then the employees are over here in other countries, and that creates a hierarchy which can be very bad. But yeah, I think that's it. That is my little spiel on democratizing the workplace. I think we should start moving towards this. It will be difficult. I don't know what the actual steps would be on a large scale to move to this from a capitalist system. We would probably need some government support for this. to be able to move to this, we would need, big success cases in different countries. I think the Mondragon cooperatives is a great start to see like a big success, because a lot of cooperatives are very small scale, very local, but big successes like this show that this can work. It's not a proof 100%, but I think we should definitely start striving towards this stuff in many industries. And of course, due to the nature of work evolving, I think this will have to live and breathe as work evolves. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, and that is the beauty of a cooperative. It is the workers get to decide how things work. They get to decide the rules, and make it work. And I think also what's important is that cooperatives within within a country, maybe even within a region like Europe, would work together, because if you try to go at it alone, I think it will be very, very difficult in the current capitalist system. Yeah. That's my spiel.